Hello, my name is Tommy Wolf, and in this video I'm going to be presenting my study titled Low Income, Limited English Proficiency, and Parental Involvement at the School Level as Predictors of Illinois High School Graduation Rates. So looking at the purpose of the study, there's been previous literature that has looked at all those three variables in the title. Specifically, we found negative correlations with family income and students with limited English proficiency on metrics of academic achievement, and positive correlations with parental involvement on metrics of academic achievement. But how much? So our goal is to understand to what extent these multiple variables influence academic achievement. So some background information. Multiple studies have long shown family income is the greatest predictor of both educational achievement and later economic success. However, poverty could also not be seen simply as income, but decreased opportunities to social capital. So we could take a social capital theory framework to this study. So with that in mind, students with disabilities and with social capital theory specifically in mind, limited English proficiency students have the lowest graduation rates compared to students of low income or students of any particular race. In addition, students whose parents play a more active role in education are more likely to have higher academic achievement. So again, to what extent do these variables affect academic achievement? Specifically for this study, our research question is going to ask, what is the effect of low income, limited English proficiency, and parental involvement at the school level on the graduation rates of Illinois high schools? So the methods. The data for this study, the data used was publicly annually available Illinois report card data from the Illinois State Board of Education. The rationale for using this data is that there's a large sample size of all Illinois schools, specifically 642 that reported their graduation rates, and the data is reliable. The data reportedly is documented in the same way. In addition, there's multiple measures of academic achievement within the data set. So for instance, SAT test scores. However, test scores were not used as a metric of academic achievement because they are in many ways shown to be a poor proxy for academic achievement and don't really do much in predicting later college success or later economic success later on as well. So the dependent variable within the dependent variable chosen for the study within the data sets was graduation rates. The reason being is the high school diploma is associated with higher economic success and well-being. And in addition, the high school diploma is necessary for college, which is also an even better predictor of higher economic attainment and just higher well-being along multiple proxies. Lastly, the Illinois report card dataset contains multiple school-level independent variables. 3 were chosen for this multiple regression based on the literature discussed prior. So the independent variables at the school level are the percentage of low-income students. So these are students, or defined by the Illinois report card, students that live in substitute care, are eligible to receive free or reduced price lunch, or whose families receive public aid. The second independent variable is going to be the percentage of students with limited English proficiency. Limited English proficiency is defined as students whose first language is other than English and are unable to perform ordinary classwork in English. Lastly, for the independent variables, is the percentage of parental involvement. So this is the percentage of parents that believe that the school facilitates involvement for parents whose students receive special education student services. So of the parents in a school whose students receive special education services, a randomized number of surveys went out to them. They completed them, and then that percentage of those surveys was used as the metric for the percentage of parental involvement. So a very specific indicator. The dependent variable, as stated earlier, is the graduation rate, the percentage of students that graduate in 4 years. All right, so for the data analysis, both descriptive statistics and inferential statistics were generated. Concerning descriptive statistics, sample size, range, mean, and standard deviation of the independent and dependent variables were generated. For inferential statistics, multiple regression was performed. The reasoning behind this is that the dependent variable graduation rate is ratio data. Percentages have a true zero. And in addition, there are multiple independent variables. Even further, we know that a correlation exists amongst all the variables that we're looking at from prior literature. Our goal is to determine the predictive influence of each variable. So let's look at the results, specifically descriptive statistics first. We could gather a lot just from this data here. So specifically looking at n, all right, our sample size in a way is for our independent variable, it's large, 3,884. However, only 642 schools reported their graduation rate. My guess for this is that some of those schools were most likely not high schools, and so therefore didn't have a graduation rate. So 642 high schools, it looks like, were in this data set. Then if we look at multiple measures of central tendency, we could gain a picture of these different variables. So for instance, if we look at the 40% of students in Illinois are considered low income. However, there's also a large range here. There's some schools that just don't have students that are considered low income, and there are schools where all the students are low income. Right? In addition, the standard deviation, all right, in relation to this mean is really, really large. All right, which means that there's just a huge range of high schools that have just a small amount of low income students, and then a very high amount of low income students. So there's just a very wide range. If we look at the percentage of students that are limited English proficiency, there's an average in the state of about 5% in most schools. However, there's some schools that 3/4 of the school students are limited English proficiency, and there's some that don't have any students that are limited English proficient. The standard deviation for this is a little bit smaller, so the percentages start to congregate a little bit closer to the mean, at least relative to the percentage of low-income students at schools. And then if we look at the percentage of parent involvement, 96% of parents say that the schools support parental involvement, but there's some schools where only 9% say that, and even 100% say it. The standard deviation is relatively small, about 8%. So most of those responses will go fairly close to that 96% range in terms of reporting parental involvement. All right. And then lastly, the mean graduation rate in this case is 89%. The standard deviation of 10. And also, again, just a wide range as well of some schools only having 17.8%. But again, a fairly small standard deviation. So for the most part, just staying around the 100% range or 80% range. All right. So now let's look at our inferential statistics. I want to show some visual representations of the data first, and then we'll look more at the statistical tests for the regression. So looking at this scatter plot and the percentage of low-income students and graduation rate, as the percentage of low-income students increases, the graduation rate for that school starts to decrease. Looking at a scatter plot for the percentage of limited English proficiency students at a school and the graduation rate for that school, as the percentage of limited English proficiency students increase at that school, the graduation rate for that school decreases as well. Lastly, our scatter plot looking at parental involvement, as the parental involvement percentage reported for a school increases, the graduation rate for that particular school increases as well. All right, so we see the patterns that are confirmed from the literature, right? So this is just really confirming the literature. But again, how much do these variables explain graduation rates? Looking at our model summary after the multiple regression was performed, we got an R-squared value and an adjusted R-squared value, and it ended up being 0.371. So a statistically significant portion, adjusted R-squared of 37.1%. So that's saying this 0.371, 37.1% of the variance in graduation rates across Illinois schools is explained by these three variables, right? Low-income students, limited English proficiency students, and parental involvement. But then we want to test how good of a fit is this this linear regression, this general linear model. So I performed an ANOVA for the regression and got a significance value of 0.000, so well below the 0.05 required. So this tells us that this 37.1% explanation in the variance is not due to chance, that it is schools with more low-income students, with more limited English proficiency students, and lower parental involvement all have significantly lower graduation rates. All right, so we know that there's a significant amount of the graduation rates are explained by just these three factors, but how does each one predict graduation rates? So again, performing my regression, I was able to get some regression coefficients, specifically beta coefficients. And if we look at our beta constant right here, our beta coefficients in relation to the constant will tell us how predictive these variables are of the graduation rates, or the variance in the graduation rates. So for instance, the percentage of low income students at a school, our beta coefficient is negative 0.195. So what this tells us is that for every 1% increase in the percentage of low income students at an Illinois high school, there is a predicted 0.195% decrease in graduation rate. All right, similarly, our percent of limited English proficiency students at a school, that is actually almost double what this value is here. So what that tells us is that for every 1% increase in the percentage of students that are limited English proficient at an Illinois school, there is a predicted 0.327% decrease in graduation rate. Lastly, our beta coefficient for parental involvement, notice that it's no longer negative, it's a positive value. And this is telling us for every 1% increase in the percentage of parental involvement scores in an Illinois high school, there is a predicted 0.154% increase in the graduation rate. Right? So a few things to notice from this data is that the parental involvement and percentage of low income, it's fairly similar to their beta coefficients in terms of their predictive power. Low income, a little bit more predictive, but then limited English proficiency is substantially more predictive compared to these two variables right here. All right. So one thing I needed to do was test for my assumptions that are a part of a multiple regression, which is really just making sure the assumption is that the data has a normal distribution. So I looked at first linearity. And so I ran the test to find my deviation from linearity when performing my multiple regression, and I got a significance value of 0.000. So I have a linear model here. My deviation from linearity, though, was 0.214 in this case, so above that 0.05 value. So this model really, the deviation from linearity does not confirm the linearity of this model right here. And then again, this was a significant value for the parent involvement percentage at a school. So not really fitting my assumption for this model right here. All right, for normality, not a lot of normality with my independent variables. There's no normal distributions observed clearly between low income, percentage of students that are limited English proficiency, or parental involvement at a school. So normal distributions were not observed. They don't fit that assumption. There's for testing for homoscedasticity, there's heteroscedasticity in the data. I kind of have like this Christmas tree, right, almost type of shape right here, where the data is not uniform as the regression standardized predictive value goes or increases, or at least moves towards the right. And lastly, looking at the independence of the independent variables to one another, another word for that is collinearity. All tolerance statistics are higher than 0.4 or under 10, and all VIF scores are below 2.5. So there's no collinearity between the independent variables. Those variables are not talking to one another.